to our friends from the media, both from local and international media. It's 4 minutes after 1 in the afternoon, Philippine Standard Time. I am Undersecretary Rocky Ignacio of the Presidential Communications Operations Office, and this is the Pre-SONA virtual presser. The virtual presser is an interactive online video platform of PCOO launched last year to engage with the
Ang
local
maganda dyan, kayong dalawa
national
meron.
media. In this virtual presser, we are providing a platform for the media to clarify pressing issues ahead of the President's State of the Nation address. Earlier today, the Security, Justice, and Peace Cluster and the Climate Change Adaptation and Mitigation and Disaster Risk Reduction Cluster presented the government's plans for recovery and resilience in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic. Joining us today, we have Cabinet Secretary Carlo Nograles. From the Security, Justice, and Peace Cluster, we have Defense Secretary Delfin Lorenzana, Foreign Affairs Secretary Teodoro Locsin Jr., National Security Council Secretary Hermigenes Esperon Jr., Department of Interior and Local Government Secretary Eduardo Anyon, Justice Secretary Minardo Guevara, Presidential Advisor on Peace, Reconciliation, and Unity, Secretary Carlito Galvez Jr. And from the Climate Change Adaptation, Mitigation, and Disaster Risk Reduction Cluster, we have Department of Environment and Natural Resources Secretary Roy Simatu, Department of Agriculture Secretary William Dar, Department of Science and Technology Secretary Fortunato de la Peña, Climate Change Commission Secretary Emmanuel de Guzman. We also have the cluster members of Climate Change Adaptation and Mitigation and Disaster Risk Reduction Cluster. We have Department of Human Settlements and Urban Development Secretary Eduardo de Rosario, Agrarian Reform Secretary John Castitriones, Philippine Atmospheric, Geophysical, and Astronomical Services Administrator, we have Administrator Vicente B. Melano, Agrarian Reform Undersecretary Emily Padilla, Department of Science and Technology Undersecretary Renato Saludum Jr., Department of Energy Undersecretary Jesus Cristino Posadas, National Economic Development and Authority OIC Undersecretary Merceditas Sombilla, Department of Public Works and Highways Undersecretary Maria Catalina Cabral, Finance Assistant Secretary Paula Alvarez, Presidential Legislative and Liaison Office Assistant Secretary Maria Rowena Flores Saban, and Metro Manila Development Authority Attorney Victor Pablo C. Trinidad. And before we start, a couple of mechanics for the media to facilitate the Q&A portion. Please listen. Make sure that you join the Zoom meeting room with your name and the name of your media outlet. To ask a question live, you may notify the moderator through the Zoom Q&A chat box. The moderator will then call your attention when it's your turn to speak. Reporters should tell to whom their questions are directed to. To make way for other participants, the media participant may initially ask 1 to 2 questions. You will be allowed to ask more questions later on if time permits. For those who will ask questions live, please turn on your video and stay muted. Only turn your audio on when it's your turn to ask questions live. For those who will not ask questions live, please turn off your video and stay muted. Make sure that you are in quiet room with the headphones on. Thank you. And now the floor is now open for the question and answer.
You're sa Rocky, nakamute ka.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. The floor is now open for the question and answer session. Can we have Melo Acuña from Asia Pacific Daily? Melo?
Yeah, good afternoon, Madam Undersecretary. My question is for Secretary Eduardo del Rosario. I'm just as interested as anybody else. Father Chito Suganog passed away at age 59. He was the priest held hostage by the Maute group for some time. And I'd like to find out from the good Secretary Del Rosario the problems being met by his department to realize the goals of Bangon Marawi. Marami pong naniniwala na kung makakabangon ang Marawi, at ang mga mamamayan nito ay hindi na makapangangalap pa ang mga terorista ng kanilang mga kakampi sa Marawi at mga kalapit lugar. Secretary Del Rosario, please.
Can we have Secretary Del Rosario? Secretary Del Rosario. Okay, Melo, and we are waiting. Secretary, please.
Yes, we didn't hear the question. Hindi audible.
Ano no?
Pwede
Okay.
ulit.
Secretary, good afternoon. Father Suganov passed away at age 59. He was held hostage by the terrorists for some time. What challenges has your office faced for its medyo matagal na pagpababangon ng Marawi sa inyong programang Bangon Marawi, Secretary?
Hindi audible. Hindi audible. Pakikuha na lang yung Secretary. Pakiulit.
Okay, Secretary, sabi po ni Melo, yung paano daw po ninyo ma-assure Melo na yung Bangon Marawi ay totoong babangon po talaga ang Marawi City. And kumusta na po yung mga rehabilitation na ipinatutupad doon?
Well, there are two general interventions na ginagawa natin sa Marawi City. Yung infrastructure interventions and non-infra. With regards to the infrastructure interventions, we have received the funds already last April and May, and this month. I was there last week at nag-start na yung construction ng vertical infrastructures in the most affected area. Yung most affected area, basically 95% devastated. At ginagawa natin ngayon ng mga vertical infrastructures, and these facilities will pave the way for the rising up of the most affected area as the business center of the city. Yung non-infra naman, it calls for numerous interventions on social services so that at the end of the day, we will have a situation in Marawi where we have provided the facilities for their economic stability and development, while at the same time addressing the problems on peace and order. So yan ang ginagawa natin, and we are certain that we will be able to achieve this because in accordance with our timeline of completing the rehabilitation by December of 2021, we are on the right track.
Okay. Madam Undersecretary, para po kay Secretary Lorenzana, sana kung po pwede.
Opo. Can we have Secretary Lorenzana, please? Secretary?
Yes. Yes.
Magandang araw po, Secretary. Pakibigyan lang po kami ng impormasyon tungkol sa mga teroristang nag-ooperate sa Pilipinas at kung meron mga banyagang terorista, saan po kaya sila nagmumula at saan sila nagkukuta ngayon?
Thank you very much for that question. Yung mga teroristang nasa Pilipinas, karamihan dyan nasa Mindanao. Sa Central Mindanao, yung iba nasa Basilan, at saka sa Hulo. Dati-dati, mayroong mga banyagang terorista dyan na galing sa labas. Kasi alam naman natin na yung ating border with Malaysia and Indonesia ay malapit at nakakalipat sila. Pero ngayong panahong ito ay wala na kaming makita o maramdamang mga banyagang terorista dito sa atin. So ang ating pinagtutuunan ng pansin ay yung mga lokal na terorista katulad ng Abu Sayyaf, yung BIFF at saka yung Dawla Islamiyah. Thank you.
Maraming salamat po. Thank you very much for the update. Thank you, Madam Undersecretary. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Melo Acuña. Question from Recto Marcene of Business Mirror for Secretary Locsin. Ito po yung tanong niya. The tribunal agreed to classify the contested features in the West Philippine Sea as rocks instead of islands. Apparently, our strategy to deprive the Taiwanese the 200 nautical miles exclusive economic zone on Itu Aba The following that logic, now we're on the same boat as the Taiwanese, deprived of the 200 nautical miles EEZ on our island. So how can we claim the arbitral award as a victory on our part when that gives the other claimants the excuse to encroach on our territorial waters, since Pag-asa and the rest are no longer islands but rocks devoid of the 200 nautical miles EEC? For Secretary Locsin.
I think when we measured out our 200-mile exclusive economic zone, we had certain coordinates along the coast, and we measure it from that. We do not measure it from these features. These are not islands; these are features. Now, therefore, one of our victories was this: that assuming a country takes over one of our features because it's out there, and then they start to reclaim it using sand from Cebu pa, which made me argue once that if that was reclaimed by China using Cebu sand, I guess it's ours again. But anyway, they can reclaim all they want, but because they are just features, they are not entitled to an exclusive economic zone of their own. Otherwise, their exclusive economic zone of the guys who took the reclaimed reefs would already be in Manila Bay, whatever. So that was a victory, clearly out and out. It's ours, and we don't need to extend it further by dangerously asserting that those features can generate their own exclusive economic zone. Because how long do you think we can hold on to it?
Okay, Secretary, ito po yung second question ni Recto Mercene para sa inyo. The Philippines' victory is to have the 9-dash line declared illegal, but China refused to abide by the tribunal ruling. Is it not logical and peaceful to agree for joint development, which we're doing now, while allowing the next generation to solve this vexing issue as suggested before, instead of letting the USA roil the South China Sea waters with threats of confrontation?
Well, the presence of the United States Navy has always been consistently with maritime law, which is the freedom of navigation, which requires you to display your military hardware in a straight line. You just go up and down very fast. There is no lingering around, no military exercises. Staying around the area. In that respect, it was really a great victory. Now it's clear. Now, this is what I want to always emphasize. Sometimes people will say, "Oh, why does China say no? We don't recognize it. No, we have our own view." Hey, it's a free world. You want me to get angry at China because they express their own opinion? Come on. The point is, we want it. They're not, if they don't want to recognize it, okay, they can say that. But we know we have the law on our side. We have the Hague on our side. So, I really, the one thing I never respond to is when people say, yeah, pero sinabi ng China, they don't agree with us. Well, it's a free world. They don't have to agree with us. You know what I mean?
Okay, thank you.
So that way, and that is why our president, very wisely, when he met with President Xi Jinping, said, okay, so now we agree to disagree. And as I also told the People's Liberation Army publication editor, I said, those little features out there, there is a whole avenue of cooperation between China and the Philippines. An avenue leading to mutually beneficial economic progress. But in that road, there is a little pebble called our feature, and it's ours. And on that pebble, we might one day stumble. And if we stumble, it will really be bad. But in the meantime, we can go around it. And there are other areas of cooperation. And then we can both mutually benefit from that. That's why when Wang Yi came here, I came up with the Memorandum of Understanding on the Development of Oil and Gas. And, I also have to reciprocate out of pure trust. I mean, I come up and I produce the memorandum, just like that, and say, State Councilor Wang Yi, this is my memorandum. He looks at it, he reads it once, and then he signs it. That's a sign of good faith, and I appreciate that. And that's why when he brought up the second one, he said, "Now, would you consider a memorandum of understanding on Belt and Road?" Then I said, because I had also written another one, and I said, "Will I consider a memorandum of understanding on Belt and Road?" I said, "No, sir, I will not consider it. Instead, I will sign it right here and now, because that expression of trust you had in me must be reciprocated," and I signed it. And that's how we ended up in the Belt and Road. And that's how we proceed forward. We don't always have to be, angry all the time. What's wrong with that? So, countries have disagreements. You have disagreements even with the United States. But that doesn't mean we can't be friends, that we can't work together. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Secretary Locsin. Can we have now Yang Fangju of Phoenix TV Hong Kong?
Good morning, everyone. I would like to address my question also to Secretary Locsin. Given the recent developments in the region and the ever-changing geopolitical landscape, how does the Philippines maneuver itself and maintain its balance in line with its independent foreign policy, at least for the next 2 years, amid the two major powers, namely China and the US?
Well, as you can see, how do we do it? Well, I think we have done it brilliantly. We have maneuvered, and always in good faith. We have never done anything in a sneaky fashion. We have been very forthright with our claims, and we have stood by our claims. And we have done it with openness and in the spirit of friendship, but also with every indication of firmness. And I think that's how you proceed in the world. You have to act as what you want to be taken as. You want to be taken seriously, and you want to be taken as a truthful power, which we are. We are a power. Remember, the Philippine archipelago by itself, just geographically, has been called the biggest unsinkable aircraft carrier group in all the waters of the world. There isn't anything like it, or even bigger than Britain. And we're there. We are both, behind us is the Pacific, in front of us is the South China Sea. You can look at it the other way. In front of us is the Pacific, and behind us is the South China Sea. We are the rampart of stability, of peace, and of freedom in this part of the world. You don't have to be belligerent about that. Geography has decided our fate, and our fate is to be a balanced and independent power in this part of the world.
Just a follow-up question, sir. How do we look at the suspension on the termination of the VSA?
Well, the president, in the light of the COVID crisis, it was very clear that we need the cooperation of the whole world. We need everyone working for a cure, for a vaccine, and for measures to help each other. And then he's the one who instructed me, and he said, suspend the abrogation of the VFA, because we will need everyone's cooperation. And let me also tell you that when I obeyed his order, and I suspended it, and I explained, people may have wondered by one statement I made, one sentence I had. Believe you me, I said, no one is upset, no one is alarmed, no one feels in any way threatened, but in every way they feel reassured by the suspension of the abrogation of the Visiting Forces Agreement, because it restores things to the way they are, so that the great powers in our part of the world need not to fear, hey, suddenly, all the things we were depending on for our mutual or forward defense are gone. No, we're all back again. Back to the way it was before the Visiting Forces Agreement was abrogated. But it's a temporary suspension. We'll see now what happens after finally the world settles down, when we have contained the COVID contagion, when we have hopefully found the vaccine, cure, and we can start rebuilding again. When we rebuild, I never stop emphasizing this. Of all the economies in the world that will help Southeast Asia, that will help Asia, and in the end, that will help the world, is the second biggest market on the planet, and that's China. And that's why we look forward, and we have every wish for the success of a post-COVID recovery by China, because in that recovery will be the tide, the rising tide that will lift all the boats in Southeast Asia, including the Philippines. So that's how it is. We all go up together. Those who wish to pull others down, but I don't think they belong to this world.
Okay. Thank you, Secretary
Thank you,
Locsin.
sir.
Thank you, Ms. Yan. Okay, we have now Joseph Morong of GMA 7. Joseph?
Yes. Good morning, Yusek Rocky. Can I have Secretary Anya, please?
Can we have Secretary Anya, please?
Yes, Joseph. Good afternoon.
Okay, I know that you're going to say that probably we have one more week bago tayo magbago ng community quarantine. But I guess when the people know and can anticipate yung problems of LSI. Now my question, sir, is, these are the data of the DOH. Yung atin pong mga critical care facilities are occupied by more than 50%, even 60%. Yung ICU beds natin, sir, 65.38%. Yung isolation beds, 79.25%. Hospitals are reporting na nag-start na silang mapuno. Yung Quezon City yesterday, probably an average of 1,500 cases to 2,000 cases. What does this factor say or indicate in terms of yun pong ating magiging CQ after July 31 or August 1, starting August 1?
Thank you, Joseph. No. As always, there is always what you call evaluation, analysis, and we always base it on science. So, unang-una muna, talagang pakikinggan muna natin yung data analytics ng ating mga experts. And then secondly, i-compare natin to sa iba't ibang risk factors, katulad ng social, economic, security. And then from there, magkakaroon ulit ng presentation sa IATF before we will come up with the recommendation to the President. But meanwhile, tuloy-tuloy yung consultation ng IATF and NTF sa lahat ng mga affected areas. In fact, this afternoon, we have a consultation dialogue meeting with Region 4A, all the governors, mayors, league president of barangays for Region 4A. We will have this afternoon. We will go down to the details, even on the process of localized lockdown. We expected that there will be a rise in numbers because we open up our economy and somehow nirelax natin yung ibang mga rules because we would like to give the opportunity or give the economy a chance to open up. So it is a continuing consultations, and our second phase of the National Action Plan, natapos na tayo sa una, which is building up and increasing our health capacities, testing centers, isolation facilities, PPEs, COVID hospitals. Now, dito naman tayo sa economic recovery while still sustaining what we have gained during the lockdown. And the third part will be on the continuing rebalancing between the health and economy. And we also consult our own people para sabi nga sa participatory governance, no, kailangan din natin ng feedback from the people. And still the involvement of every individual in obeying, complying with the health standards and protocols. That is really very, very important. So today, hindi pa natin masasabi, Joseph, kung ano yung susunod na classification natin. Still July, 22. We have still 8 days to go. Actually, 9 days to go. So, makikita naman natin makikita naman ng publiko kung anong magiging trend natin. And our mayors, particularly here in the National Capital Region, nakita naman natin yung kanilang sinseridad at commitment sa pagpapatupad ng localized lockdown.
Sir, ang question ko sir, paano kung halimbawa no, ay nagpatuloy yung ganitong klaseng trend, mga 1,500 to 2,000 cases every day, and then yun pong dumadami yung ating paggamit ng mga critical care facilities. Pag sir, nagpatuloy yan, I mean, of course we have 9 days, pero kung halimbawa na wala na tayong magagawa to lower these numbers, are we going back to MECQ? And a related question is, will it be difficult for the government to return to an MECQ?
There is always the possibility of going back to MECQ or even ECQ. Depende sa development. No? And even the president said na actually, the huling meeting namin, he was opting for MECQ, but we requested the president that our NCR mayors really promised that they will make sure that localized lockdown are implemented. So, andyan din yung possibility, Joseph. It depends really on the data analytics.
Or sir, ibig sabihin, this trend, does it lend to a decision na MECQ?
No, I cannot say that, Joseph, kasi maraming factors na titingnan natin dito. No? The doubling rate, of course, yung sinabi mo, yung health utilization rate, and of course, yun yung other risk factors. So, as of today, hindi pa talaga natin masasabi yan. So, we'll just wait for the coming days sa mga development.
Okay, sir. Thank you for your time.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Joseph. Thank you, Secretary Anyo. Can we have now Jale Tao of CCTV?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon. I have a question to Secretary Lawson. My question is, first, many people have drawn comparisons between Hong Kong's security laws and the Philippines' anti-terrorism legislation, both aimed at enhancing national security, but criticized in the West. What is your comment?
Your question
You want to
for
compare the national security law? Well, I have to tell you, I haven't read the Hong Kong security law, but I do know this, and we have consistently voted this way abroad, that is a matter of the internal security of the People's Republic of China. And to what extent it may have affected the handover terms, I haven't studied that. But the anti-terrorism law is a completely different thing altogether. The anti-terrorism law is aimed to prevent an event that hasn't really happened in the Philippines yet. We have had insurgencies, the longest running communist insurgency. That's not terrorism. And the answer to insurgency is called combat. And that's why we have the longest trained army in the world. And we do that, we fight them. We also had the longest secessionist war. And we had our great army fighting that, and we beat it. Instead, you have now peace in Mindanao. But one thing that we were warned about, even I remember this in the time of President Gloria Macapagal-Arroyo. U.S. Homeland Security came and said, you people have never experienced a real terrorist attack. I suggest you prepare for it. Because the United States was not prepared for it. Spain was not prepared for it. And this is the answer. I was an author of the first anti-terrorist act, and frankly, I thought it was brilliant. But of course, there are compromises. When it got to the Senate, then it Pimentel basically emasculated it a bit. But now comes the improved version. And the purpose of the Anti-Terrorism Act is to prevent something that we have yet to experience in its full scale. And that is a terrorist attack. Aimed, remember, it's not aimed at the armed forces. The armed forces is armed. That's their job, is to fight. It's aimed at innocent civilians, totally powerless against the carnage of a terrorist attack. And this is the law that prevents it. People say, can it be abused? Against the civilians it is meant to protect. I suggest to all the critics who apparently are either illiterate or they just won't read it, is to read the law, to see all the protections. National Security Advisor Esperon has put out there. Any abuse of this law, it cannot be abused. It can only be misused by law enforcement authorities. The penalties on law enforcement officers are horrendous. And you know what? This is a vast improvement on the version I introduced in Congress in my time. When the abuser cannot be found, maybe because the abuse happens in a detention cell, you know who goes to jail? His commanding officer. That is known. And he goes to jail in place of that abusing officer. Where do you find that? I don't even think you'll find that in Homeland, in the Patriot Act. So that's the kind of law that Ping Lacson and others put together. And they don't see any equivalence between one and the other, because one has to, the issues against the national security law of Hong Kong have to do with a matter of the internal security of the People's Republic of China. This has to do with ours. And it's not internal security. It's a specific act, terrorism. We've got other things. When we fight insurgencies, we have laws for that. We fight rebellions, we have laws for that. Aggression, foreign invasion, we have laws for that. But an insidious new method of attack against innocent civilians, not soldiers. Soldiers are armed and they protect themselves. If they don't protect themselves, they're not real soldiers. This is what the Anti-Terrorism Act, it's a very specific act, and it's perfectly done.
I have a follow-up question. So you had a video conference with the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi. As the coordinator of the ASEAN and China, what role will the Philippines play in the regional COVID-19 cooperation, economic recovery, and stability in the South China Sea?
Well, that's quite like well. For the first cooperation we had was a meeting we had in Laos, because the West was intent on pillaring China for the COVID virus. Instead of cooperating with China, as China was doing its best to try to contain this thing that broke out in China, from spilling out and also from destroying their own country. Instead, the West was determined to just put them down. So I insisted with Wang Yi, I said, no, we meet in Vientiane, and I speak up for China and say, China is doing the best it can to contain this virus, to find a cure, to find and discover methods by which to contain it. And we, ASEAN, stand by China in that. And you know, we got all of ASEAN to go with us. The second meeting we had recently had to do with the South China Sea. And again, I reaffirmed the wisdom of both my president and President Xi Jinping. The last time they met, he said very clearly, we can't agree. So let's just agree to disagree and see if we can move forward from there. Because, let's face it, it's the biggest market in the world, frankly, for us, for most of Asia. There's the biggest market for the United States. It might be even the biggest market for Europe. So we look forward to the post-COVID recovery of China, because that will lead in the post-COVID recovery of the economies of the rest of the world. That's how we got together. If you're going to be talking about our role in the Code of Conduct, well, yes, we are the China coordinator, and that's proceeding apace. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Secretary Locsin. Thank you, Jael. Can we have Claire Zhao Bloomberg from Bloomberg?
For Secretary Locsin and Secretary Guevara, would you know how many more Filipino seafarers remain stranded on ships as COVID keeps ports shut and prevents crew changes? Because we've heard reports before of seafarers being overworked and had to go home. Has the DFA or DOJ received any complaints of forced labor or requests for assistance?
Can we have Secretary Locsin first?
Who? Oh, okay. Explanation of what? No. Pardon, again?
Claire, can you repeat your question, please?
Would you have the number of how many more Filipino seafarers remain stranded on ships? And has the DFA or DOJ received any complaints of forced labor or requests for assistance to get home?
Frankly, I don't know how many more we have left out there, but we are moving them. We also, for the first time in the world, created a green lane This green lane will facilitate both the evacuation or the expatriation of seafarers and their redeployment abroad, because we have the most valued seafaring community, and we don't want them to lose their jobs. We led this. We had hoped the rest of the world would follow, but the rest of the world seems to be narrow-minded. But right now, we're well ahead of them. And we are the model of the world now in how to handle migrant labor in the pandemic. I don't think anyone comes close to the Philippines. And the way we take care of our people out there, and we transit other workers from other countries, take care of them. We make them come through here and then go back to their homes. No country in the world has been as cooperative, to the extent possible, as efficient as we have been. And we're very proud of that. I've been told that not just recently by United Nations officials. They're astonished at our care for migrants, both our own and those of other countries. Well, that's just the Filipino way. We've always been like that. We take care of strangers in strange lands. Yes.
Can we have for Secretary Guevara? Yes. Have you had any reports, maybe of forced labor requests for legal assistance from seafarers who've been forced to keep working because they can't go home?
Hello, Claire. The DOJ doesn't have any information also on the number of seafarers stranded in vessels. But as Secretary Locsin earlier said, we came up with this green lane procedure where the passage of seafarers coming in and going out has been facilitated. And I think it's working. And up to this time, we have not received at the DOJ any complaints for forced labor or any complaint related to that for that matter.
Thanks, sir. Lastly, for Secretary Lorenzana, how will the recent U.S. position paper on the South China Sea affect our military positioning and how we work with the U.S. in the disputed area?
Can we have Secretary Lorenzana, please?
Can you repeat the question, please?
How will the recent U.S. position paper on the South China Sea affect our military positioning and how we work with the U.S. in the disputed area?
Oh yeah, the position of the U.S. Vis-a-vis the South China Sea is the U.S. That is their concern. Actually, we are not part of their activities in the South China Sea. They do it on their own. Now, if it creates peace and stability in the South China Sea, then it's also good for us. But on the other hand, it could also create some trouble or instability, and we will be adversely affected. So it cuts both ways. It could benefit us. It could also be detrimental to us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Claire. Can we have now, thank you, Secretary Lorenzana and Secretary Locsin. Can we have now Xingcheng Wang of Guangming Daily?
Hi, good afternoon. My question is going to DFA Secretary Locsin. The former DFA Secretary, Rosario, suggested the Philippines to raise the arbitral ruling to the United Nations Assembly in September. Will the DFA really take it seriously, and how will the DFA push forward with the arbitral ruling? Thank you.
I heard of that proposal, and my reaction then was exactly the same as my reaction now. We won it already. Now, why would you want to relitigate something that you won? It's like, you don't like you won? So it doesn't make any sense. So I rejected it. No. But do you want to bring it up to the United Nations? We want it. We don't need to go back to the United Nations. You bring it back to the United Nations and it becomes a question of numbers. And this has nothing to do with numbers. This has to do with law. I'm a lawyer, so I really have this profound respect for the law. The law is eternal. The rest is opinion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Secretary.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Juan. Can we have now Ivel Santos or Ivel Santos of Vera Files? Can we have Ivel? Okay. Okay, can we have now Anjo Almario of CNN Philippines? Wala rin si Aljo.
Yeah. Hi,
Anjo,
Yusek.
yeah.
Yeah.
Anjo, go.
My question is for Justice Secretary Guevara.
Secretary Guevara,
Hi,
please.
Sec.
Joe, good afternoon.
Yeah. Hi, sir. Good afternoon. Yeah, sir. There have been criticisms about the implementation of the rule of law during the pandemic. Thousands have been arrested, but most of them are poor. Now, how do you respond to those who say that there's inconsistent, unfair application of the rule of law?
I wouldn't really say that there is an inconsistent application of the rule of law. It just so happened that a greater number of those arrested came from the lower income groups, no? And that's simply because they're the ones who were caught on the streets, no? And for that reason, since they have been found, or at the time of their arrest, were found to be violating certain quarantine rules and regulations, kaya sila marami, no? Pero at the same time, those whom we may say belong to the upper income groups, no, or people who are known in society, by and large, they are also charged and prosecuted. No, of course, we know the celebrated case of one senator, na in the beginning was thought to be being given preferential or special treatment by law enforcement agencies as well as by the DOJ. But we all know that that's not true. And as a matter of fact, the preliminary investigation is going on. And that is the same with respect to certain police officers who have also been found or alleged to be to have violated certain protocols or quarantine regulations. So their cases have also been filed with the prosecutor's office. So it's really a matter of perception, no? But kasi greater number yung mga tao sa masasabi natin na nasa lower income levels, yung tinatawag natin mga mahihirap, na nahuhuli sa mga violations. So, but it doesn't mean at all that there is an unfair application of the law. We apply this uniformly as possible, Anjo.
Right, thank you, Sec. Sir, just a follow-up. Sir, yesterday you released, I think, data, the number of deaths so far in Bucor facilities. From January to July 19, you have 476 inmates who died due to COVID or non-COVID causes. And of course, over the weekend, the death of drug convict J.B. Sebastian and other high-profile inmates broke out. Sir, do you find these numbers alarming? And also, why limit the NBI probe to just the deaths of the 9 high-profile inmates?
Yeah, alam mo, when we had this very long discussion with the Bureau of Corrections or the Bucor people last Monday, they informed us that on the average, no, even prior to the COVID pandemic, ang average daily rate ng death, no, in the penitentiaries all over the country is something like anywhere between 2 and 3 persons dying every day, no? So for various causes na yun, lahat-lahat na. So yung sinight nila na figure na 476 na namatay mula nung January up to July 19, sa lahat din ng penitentiaries ito, no, and prison farms all over the country. So if you average that, if you divide that by the total number of days during that period, it would appear to be something like 2.3 on the average daily. So parang masasabi natin na hindi naman siya substantially higher than the daily average during the past year. So merong slight increase, and I suppose that that is because precisely of COVID-19, no? So yung 21 na namatay for COVID-19, hindi naman lahat yan mga drug offenders, no? Siyam lang sa kanila ang drug offenders. 3 of them came from the Correctional Institute for Women and 9 from the general population. At yung mga namatay sa COVID-19, karamihan sa kanila ay may pre-existing illnesses na, no? Mostly respiratory. Kaya konti lang talaga yung namatay actually for COVID-19. Now, your question as to why we are focusing our investigation on the 9 drug offenders who died of COVID-19. You know, when the Bucor people presented to us their protocols, no, pagka merong namamatay in prison, we noted na medyo inadequate, no. So this will be the subject matter of a further discussion, how to improve their protocols pagka merong namamatay sa mga prisons, no. But you know, so many stories, so many theories have been swirling around na parang dinidispute na ang ikinamatay nga ay COVID-19, itong mga convicted drug offenders na ito. At merong mga stories or theories saying that in fact they did not die, and so forth and so on, that parang napalitan yan by someone else and they were let go. So because of these various theories, and also for the benefit of the Bucor to dispel any doubt na meron ngang any anomaly dito sa mga pagkamatay na ito, allegedly due to COVID-19, then we thought it proper and prudent to request the National Bureau of Investigation to step into the picture and make its own inquiry into the matter. That's it, Anjo.
Okay, thank you, Anjo.
Thank you,
Thank you, Secretary Guevara. Can we have Ibel Santos? Nandito na ba si Ibel Santos? Ibel Santos ng Vera Files? Hello. Yes, go ahead. I think, please unmute, Ibel. We cannot hear you. Okay. Okay, puntahan muna natin si ayan. Okay. Can you hear us, Ibel? Okay, please. Ibel, balikan ka namin. Puntahan muna namin si Lian Buwan ng Rappler. Can we have, yeah, go ahead.
This is for either Secretary Guevara or Secretary Anyo, or both, if both want to answer. Sirs, can you explain why there are more than 3,000 quarantine violators still in jail despite that these are bailable offenses? Is it a matter of bottleneck po sa prosecutorial mechanisms or sa pag-file ng complaint ng police? Or is it because they're not able to pay bail? And what are your immediate measures to address this, to free these people, considering na off-limits muna ngayon yung BJMP facilities, and is it on the table at all na ilimit na lang muna yung arrest so not to decongest the jails further?
Can we have Secretary Guevara first?
Well, Lian, on the matter, on the part of the DOJ, no, sa inquest, kasi mga parang arrested yan or apprehended yan in the act of committing a violation ng let's say a quarantine rule or a health protocol and so forth and so on. So on the part of the DOJ, i-inquest yan, that will be the logical procedure. And we process itong inquest na ito as soon as they are filed by the law enforcement agencies with the Department of Justice. Now, kung hindi possible na ma-inquest ka agad, then we have requested before, we have made arrangements with the law enforcement agencies before na wag na muna silang i-process, ma-release na lang, and then mag-subject na lang to regular preliminary investigation at a later time kasi nga naiipon But insofar as those who are brought to inquest are concerned, then the DOJ immediately completes the inquest process, whether online or actual. So I don't know about Secretary Anyo kung merong other explanations regarding the cumulative number.
Yeah, thank
Yes,
you.
Secretary.
Actually, kukunti na lang yung number na yan, just to straighten the facts. From the start of our quarantine, we have a total of almost 200,000 yung na-apprehend natin doon. 112,826 individuals were just warned, no, and sent home. 34,134 individuals were fined. And 64,840 individuals were arrested for curfew disobedience. No? Itong 3,000 plus na ito na lang yung natira, katulad nga ng sabi ni Secretary Guevara, no? Yung i-inquest na yung ginagawa natin because as much as possible ay ayaw natin ng magkaroon ng congestion and at the same time, hindi rin natin ma-require yung court para pumasok sila, especially during the lockdown. But bawat isa na yan ay ina-attend natin. And our goal also is to decongest our jails. And likewise, out of the result of our dialogue with the local chief executives, the Union of Local Authorities of the Philippines, the leagues of provinces, cities, municipalities, magkakaroon na lang kami ng uniform implementation kung paano ipatutupad yung health standards protocols. No? A number of days in prison kapag nag-violate ka ng hindi pag-wear ng mask. We suggest 10 to 30 days. Physical distancing also 10 to 30 days imprisonment. At kung ikaw naman ay ipa-fine sa about between 1,000 to 5,000 pesos. So yan yung magiging uniform implementation natin. With this also, we would like to really implement yung mga standards na to. If we can do that, actually, we will prevent further spread of this COVID virus. Thank you.
Secretary, have we identified bakit 3,000 pa rin? Kasi hindi na siya gumalaw from 2,000 to 3,000.
Well, we'll check on that. No? Ito na siguro yung meron ng talaga existing na kaso. So, we will check on that.
I have a second question, Yusek.
Yes, go ahead, Lian.
This is for either Secretary Anyo po ulit or Secretary Lorenzana about the anti-terror law. The Justice Secretary Guevara said it may be prudent for law enforcement to wait muna for the IIR before implementing the law. What do you make of that? And are you heeding the call of the Justice Secretary to not implement muna the anti-terror law while waiting for the IRR?
Yes, it is prudent to wait for the IRR. But you know, IRR is not a requirement for the implementation of the law. There is already jurisprudence on that, People of the Philippines versus Nicolas. And it is a Supreme Court decision na after 15 days of official publication, the law is already effective. The only question is, siyempre, kung wala pang IRR, there are so many people who might question the law enforcers on carrying out this law on certain provisions and applications. So, para maiwasan mo yung ganon, antay mo na lang yung IRR. Kasi open to questions. But there is no restriction in implementing the law because the law is already effective. And what we will do is to fast track the crafting of the IRR as soon as possible.
So, sir, are you heeding the call of Secretary Guevara na hold muna?
Kung meron kasing talagang terrorist threat, we have to apply the law. Kung nakabitin or nakabingit yung buhay ng ating mga mamamayan, we have to implement the law. Now, kung wala naman malalaki ang terrorist threat, we can wait for the IR.
For Secretary Lorenzana.
Yeah, good afternoon. Yeah, I have nothing more to add to Secretary Anyos. Tama yung sinabi niya. We could wait for the IRR, but if there is a terroristic action now, we are going to use it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lian. Can we have, thank you, Secretary Lorenzana, Secretary Anyo. Can we have Elijah Roderos of Vera Files?
Hello, good afternoon po.
Good afternoon.
Hello, good afternoon po. Medyo naglolo ko po yung cam ko, pero here's my question po for Secretary Advisor Esperon, Secretary Guevara, and Secretary Lorenzana. What are your considerations in crafting the IRR for the anti-terrorism law? And will the issues raised in the petitions in the Supreme Court be factored in, like the grounds for warrantless arrest and prolonged detentions of suspects?
Okay, can we have Secretary Esperon, please?
There are many considerations because we will be practically crafting, implementing rules and regulations for actions and programs that we will have to implement not only to counter the kinetic forces or the existing forces, but also to prevent and counter violent extremism. And so foremost in my mind right now, and this will be my contribution because I'm a member of the 9-man Anti-Terrorism Council, would be on the matters of organization, because it is provided in the law that we have to designate people who will be conducting apprehensions, conducting surveillance, and so indeed we have to create units, and the people that will be manning this must be nominated and designated or assigned and trained. We want a fair, fast, and efficient implementation of the law. So we have to start with the organization itself. As of now, we simply use our trained forces. We are sufficient in that, but this time we want specific persons to be assigned to specific assignments. There are many things more that we could talk about in the IRR, but you know, equipment, etc. But that is exactly a that should actually be a result of the different facets of the law. Meaning, since the members are the executive secretary who could lead the Terrorism Council, I act as the vice chairman. As of now, I am the designated vice chairman. The Secretary of National Defense, of course, has a lot of inputs into this. Secretary DILG has a lot of inputs into this. Secretary of Finance has to come in because of financial matters, and AMLAC has to come in also. Department of Foreign Affairs, Department of Justice, Department of ICT, because we have to be enabled to really monitor the probable terrorists. I see that the implementing rules and regulation will actually be even a manual, I must say, that would straighten out all the doubts that we have now, that you have now. We are assuring you that we have all the safeguards, but the IRR is important because it will be our operating manual. And this will be provided to the Joint Congressional Oversight Committee, as well as to the Commission on Human Rights. So we will be very transparent, but we will assure you that what we really want to accomplish is to defeat the terrorists, especially the matter of foreign terrorists. Because in the Human Security Act that this act repealed, the FTFs, foreign terrorist fighters, were not covered. And this time also, the Anti-Terrorism Council has to come up with what we call the Preventing and Countering Violent Extremism programs, which covers all the 5 vulnerable sectors of society. So there's a lot that we should be doing there. We will have our own. Thank you.
Can we have Secretary Lorenzana, please? Secretary Lorenzana.
I think Secretary Esperon has already covered everything. I had nothing to add. Thank you.
Okay, Elijah, do you have any question?
Yes po. I have a question for DOF ASEC Paula Alvarez or NEDA Yusek Zambila. As
Okay.
mentioned all over the news, the COVID-19 pandemic has pushed our kababayans here in NCR to go back to their provinces because they don't have work or they don't have businesses anymore. Thus, they remain in their provinces until the economy fully reopens and the pandemic ends. Can you provide any update on the promise of the President Duterte last SONA 2019 to encourage more investments in the countryside? How much foreign and Filipino investments approved for other regions besides NCR today?
Can we have Asek Alvarez or from NEDA? Asek Alvarez from NEDA. I think Elijah, mukhang hindi na sila nakasama. Babalikan na lang natin Elijah kung makakausap natin sila. Punta muna tayo kay salamat Elijah Roderos ng Vera Files. Puntahan natin si Jillian Cortez, Business World. Jillian. Can we have Jillian now? Go ahead, Jillian.
Hello, my question is directed for CABSEC Nograles. So Secretary Roque said that for President Duterte's SONA, he will be focusing on the COVID-19. So what are measures he will be emphasizing in his address?
Abangan na lang natin, no? Ayaw natin pangunahan si Pangulong Duterte. Pero ang naging mabuti dito sa ating Pre-SONA forum is at least naibahagi na po natin sa ating mga kababayan kung ano na yung mga nagawa natin, mga programa na ginagawa natin at patuloy nating gagawin maging this year, 2020 hanggang sa next years. And then yung ating mga bagong programa panlaban sa COVID-19. So dahil na ibahagi na natin, then si Pangulong Duterte now is free to discuss other matters. Kaya minabuti ni Pangulo na dito sa SONA niya, dahil na ibahagi na po sa Pre-SONA yung iba't ibang mga aspeto ng governance, ay libre na po si Pangulo to discuss ano naman yung actions, plano, at ang mga roadmap niya, kumbaga, in terms of handling, fighting, and conquering this pandemic.
So still on the SONA, sir. So besides his priorities in combating the COVID-19 crisis, will he discuss more economic reforms, the cha-cha, or maybe even the death penalty, which were all mentioned in his past addresses?
Dahil ang kausap niya doon sa SONA at ang physical presence niya ay nandun sa Kongreso, maaari rin po niyang banggitin yung ano pa ang mga priority legislation niya. So because it is not only an address to the people but addressing also the legislators, then he may also talk about legislative priorities niya. And going into the, kumbaga, next 2 years, marami pa tayong mga low-hanging fruits in terms of legislation and possibly new legislation that we want to push forth, especially in battling this COVID-19 pandemic.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Jillian. May pahabol po na question from Raisa Robles for Secretary Lorenzana and for Secretary Locsin. Ang tanong po niya, U.S. Secretary of Defense Mark Esper said on Tuesday he hoped to visit China by the end of the year to improve crisis communications channels and address other areas of mutual interest, even as he condemned China's maritime activity in the South China Sea. What is the Philippines' view on this? What implications would U.S. Defense Secretary Esper's visit to China have on the current situation in the China Sea, and what would you see as an ideal outcome for Secretary Locsin and Secretary Lorenzana? Can we have Secretary Locsin first?
You're talking about the comment made by Defense Secretary Esper?
Yes, Secretary.
Well, that's interesting. I take note of his observations. I
Secretary
don't think I'm
Lorenzana.
required to respond to it. Thank you so much.
Okay. For Secretary Lorenzana, please.
You're asking my reaction to the visit of Secretary Esper to China? Yun ba yun?
Sir, ulitin ko na lang po yung question niya.
Oo.
U.S. Secretary of Defense Mark Esper said on Tuesday he hoped to visit China by the end of the year to improve crisis communications, channels, and address other areas of mutual interest, even as he condemned China's maritime activity in the South China Sea. What is the Philippines' view on this? What implication would U.S. Defense Secretary Esper's visit to China have on the current situation in the China Sea? What would you see as an ideal outcome?
I think it's good that Secretary Esper is planning to go to China to talk to his counterpart. You know, if the two superpowers will discuss things, especially concerning the South China Sea, it will be good for us here in the region. So it's good for us. I think I agree with that plan to discuss, to go there and talk to each other. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Secretary Locsin. Thank you, Secretary Lorenzana. For Secretary Simatu, can we have Secretary Simatu?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, Secretary, I have a question from Ted Cordero, GMA News Online. Can you confirm that some mining operations suspended by the late Secretary Gina Lopez are now about to resume? How many are given the go signal to resume, and what companies are they?
Yung mga dumaan lang sa proper nag-submit ng for consideration sa DENR, ay meron naman nagkaroon ng audit ng aming mga technical experts pumunta doon sa mga mining companies na suspended by the former Secretary Lopez. Out of that, 13 na napunta sa DNR, then 14 napunta sa Office of the President. So yung sa amin sa DNR ay dumaan na ito sa audit team, meron na silang mga recommendations. May mga iba naka-comply na sa mga corrective measures, yung mga hindi pa. So yung mga hindi pa ay talagang tutuloy pa rin naman nila yung kanilang compliance bago naman sila they will be allowed to open.
Okay, thank you, Secretary Simatu. And ito, ubos na po yung ating oras. Maraming salamat po sa ating mga cabinet secretaries na kasama natin ngayong araw. Salamat din po sa media na nag-participate sa ating virtual presser. And please follow our social media po accounts on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for more updates. Again, marami pong salamat sa inyo pong pagtutok sa virtual presser natin ngayong araw para sa ating Pre-SONA Tatak Pagbabago. Ako po si Yusek Rock Ignacio. Maraming salamat po sa inyong pagsubaybay.